Greetings, welcome back to CS133 Practical Programming with Python. We're on week 1, variables and inputs. This is lesson variables. Our objective is to understand what variables are and how they're used in programming. This is a very basic and fundamental building block for all of programming. Our success criteria is you'll demonstrate creating a variable, setting it to a number, and then printing it correctly in Trinket. All right, so you'll be able to know what it is, how to create one, and then how to access it. And this kind of brings us to the whole concept of what is a variable in programming. So we'll kind of go a little bit between the difference between math and thing, but bottom line is if you can wrap your head around, it is a placeholder for the program. It is a placeholder for memory in the program. You're basically giving a name to a piece of memory in the computer that you can recall at any time and use it as if it is that information. We'll kind of see what that looks like in a little bit, but you remember this, it is a placeholder. It is a place in memory that you can change, just like you can change a file, you can change all kinds of things on a computer, and it's still that piece of memory, it's still called that thing, right? So as we go through this, we're going to kind of look at the difference between math and programming, and then how it works, how variables work, period, and then how you actually use them in Python. So one important thing as we go through is the equal sign doesn't really mean equal to. All right. So in math, it does, right? X plus 1 equals 2. So in this case, x equals 1. It is equal to it. However, again, I said it's a piece of memory. So if we're looking at this and we go through x plus 1 equals answer, you don't know what x is, right? This doesn't work. This is invalid in programming. Now what you do use is something like this, x equals 2. Now, from going forward, I'm going to say something close to gets or is set to, because again, it's not equal to it, it's set to it. You might picture it as a bucket, and you are taking the number 2 and you are putting it inside the bucket, and then you are putting an X on the bucket, and that's the name of the bucket, right? And then that is the storage memory, so you go put that off so you can come back and use it whenever you want. So when you have x plus 1 equals 3, again, that doesn't necessarily work, right? So the key to how this works is how we're going through this and how you're looking at the math to this. So again, this is all kind of math. What you're looking at is every time you do this, you are changing what that is actually set to. So let's look at an actual program. So I'm going to make this so we can actually see it a little bit better. And we're going to look at some code. A lot of this right here is, this is a comment, so we can separate everything for this and explain as it's going. So x equals 2. Again, x is set to 2. The value of x is 2. And this is what we're mentioning when you use the variable. When you use the variable later, print x. Well, what is x? X is 2. So when we print x, it prints 2. Now again, we just have a little space holder. Now when we print x plus 1, again, every time the computer sees x, it's going to go back, look at what the last one was used, and that. So 2 plus 1 equals 3. So now we're going to change it yet again. X is set to 0, right? So now 0 is put inside of x. So from until it's changed as it goes down, x is 0. So when we actually call it, and this is, you're actually accessing it, and whenever you see x when it's not next to an equal sign, it's saying, all right, I want the context. The contents of x goes right there. So this is essentially the same as saying 0 plus 1, right? At this point, because that is what x is set to. So 0 plus 1 is 1. That's what we're getting that over here. And again, going back, it's the very last change. So we set it to 2, then we set it to 3. X is going to take this right here, right? I set it to 2, but I didn't do anything with it. And then I set it to 3. So now it's 3. So 3 plus 1 is 4. Again, it's just like that is a 3. That is really the basic concepts of how variables work. So let's kind of look at this together for our naming conventions we talked about. So what if you, because X isn't necessarily a very good naming conventions, we already talked about that. Unless you're literally using for like X and Y, then X can make sense. But you're not normally going to be enter age, X equals 18. No, it's not. You're probably going to do something like age or my age, right? You're going to use something that makes sense to what it's actually tracking. And it might be, depending if you're getting user input, it might be user age, right? And again, I'll make this slightly larger so you can see it. So user age equals 18. And then maybe your birth year. So you could just put year equals 2000, right? And then rand number, you can put random, random num, however you want to, equals, and then, some random number. This is how you create it. So if I ever tell you to create a variable, you're just going to give it the name of it. Again, like if I want to access user age, I can print user age. I run this, and I can actually, do some work with it. I can also, do some math. Year minus user age. So if whatever it is the year 2000 and the person's 18, this will figure out, of course, let's just put 2020 here, right? If it's 2020, the year is 2020, won't care this birth year, the year is 2020, and we go ahead and we minus user age, it should say when their birth year is. Let's run that, 2002. So we can use these, again, as they're essentially, it calls a content. So that content goes down here. This 18 goes down here. Now, again, there's some other things that show this better, like where you see the variables, what they're actually equal at any given time over here, and then they just update. But that is what is the very last time I changed this. The very last time is the one that's set. But in Python, to create a variable, you just give it the name. You have to go through over the proper names. I can't use print as a variable. That is not going to work. It's breaking because it's trying to print 23, but you didn't use the proper syntax to actually do that. So you have to use a valid name. But when I say create a variable, right? Create a variable to hold blah blah blah, right? You will just name it my var. Again, not necessarily a good variable name, but create a variable, name it something, equals, and you've created a variable, right? This creates the variable to hold or to, and set it to, then whatever I tell you to set it to, you set it to. So this is the basics of variables, right? It is just a placeholder in memory, and you are giving it a name, and whenever you want to call it again, you just use that variable name. So I created a variable called year, I set it to 2020, and later on I can now use it. And we'll see there's a lot of times you can change all of this. For example, I can now do birth year equals, and I already said that prints the birth year, right? So if I am able to take these other two variables, I can send them to another variable, and then I can just print birth year. All right, so we run this again, and we're getting the same number, right? we set it to 18, but then we reset it to 23. So now user age is 23. We come down here. Year is still 2020 minus 23. And then we did here, and nothing with that. That just printed it. So now we're going to take 2020 minus 23. Birth year is set to it. So we created a new variable. That created a new variable. And then it was set to 1997. So when we printed it, it printed the same thing. So that's kind of examples of how you create it and how you kind of manipulate it. So with that, go ahead and watch the next lesson, and then we'll have our practice in a little bit.